Dark Devils, where the leaves mark the taken. December settled over Los Molinos like a lid on a coffin. The cold was wrong, too deep, too sudden. Old-timers said it was the coldest since records were kept. The walnut orchard stood bare and brittle, their limbs rattling in the wind like the bones of giants. Frost clung to every fence post and power line. Even the Sacramento River steamed in the mornings, throwing pale mist across the banks. The fog was still here, though thinner than during the Chicken Lee killings. It didn't blanket the streets like before. It lingered in sheets, low to the ground, curling between buildings as if it had learned how to sneak. And now, the dead were showing up again. Deputy Garcia stepped out of his patrol car and into the alley behind the Los Molinos Feed and Supply. The gravel crunched loud under his boots in the pre-dawn stillness. He pulled his collar up against the cold, but it didn't help. The air bit at him, burning his nostrils and lungs, carrying that strange mix of smells he'd been noticing all month. Burnt plastic, copper, damp rot. The body was propped against a rusting dumpster. Eddie Harrell, 47, part-time fence repairman, missing for 2 days. He didn't look like a man who had simply frozen to death. His skin was pale and waxy, frost rimmed his beard, and his body was bent in a way no one's should be. Shoulder jammed up against his ear, knees tucked nearly to his chest, hands frozen into tight claws. Patches of hair were gone from the back of his head, leaving smooth, round spots of bare skin. Garcia crouched in front of him. His eyes scanned everything, the shape of the frost on the collar, the way the ice had climbed from Eddie's hairline down to his jaw, the fact that there were no signs of a struggle, no boot prints in or out of the alley except Eddie's own. Something else caught his eye. The side of the dumpster was covered in spray-painted maple leaves, black, brown, and green silhouettes, layered over one another in uneven rows. The paint was fresh enough that it still gave off that chemical bite in the air. Garcia's gaze lingered on them. He'd seen that pattern before. The same leaf silhouettes were painted across an old Chevy van and the warped siding of a weather-beaten trailer on the east side of Josephine Street. Marion Mapes. Garcia stood, scanning the shadows at the far end of the alley. The fog was thicker there, pooling like smoke. A cold gust rattled the dumpster lid, the sound echoing sharp and metallic off the brick walls. Somewhere beyond that, a train horn moaned, distant, muffled by the winter air. Closing the notebook, he looked one last time at Eddie Harrell's contorted body. The maple leaves stared back at him from the dumpster. Garcia's breath hung in the cold. "I think I know whose work this is," he muttered, before turning back toward his cruiser. By the end of the first week of December, Eddie Harrell wasn't the only one. Garcia sat at his desk in the small Tehama County substation, flipping through the stack of missing persons reports. Each file had the same unease stamped into it, not on paper, but in the way the details lined up wrong. First was Tom Ralston. Went outside to start his pickup before dawn, never came back in. His wife found the truck idling, door open, coffee thermos still steaming in the cup holder. His boots were on the ground next to the driver's door, standing perfectly upright in the frost. No footprints anywhere. 2 days later, Maria Keene's coat was found lying on the shoulder of Highway 99. Zipped up, warm to the touch, no tears or blood, just empty. The frost inside the coat was thicker than the frost on the outside, like the cold had bloomed from within. Then Clyde Matson, a retired ranch hand, vanished from his front porch. The rocking chair still swayed when his neighbor came by with coffee. His reading glasses were folded neatly on the armrest. Each scene had something else in common. Somewhere nearby, there was a maple leaf silhouette, spray-painted in black, brown, or deep green. Always the same shape. Always fresh. Garcia rubbed his temples, the smell from Eddie's alley still lingering in his memory. Burnt plastic, copper, rot. He pulled a county map toward him and began marking the locations of the disappearances. The cluster was tight, centered on a single neighborhood, east side of Josephine Street. At the center of that circle sat a sagging trailer under the tangled canopy of black oak and maple trees. The siding was warped and painted over in jagged patches of camouflage colors. A detached garage leaned to one side, roof patched with mismatched tin. In the yard, an old Chevy van crouched under the trees, its surface covered entirely in the same maple leaf silhouettes. Marion Mapes. He'd been the local crank for years, a reclusive conspiracy hoarder who painted his property to hide from government satellites. Most people avoided him, but lately, the reports were different. He'd been seen out after midnight, standing in the fog at the edge of people's yards. He'd been heard talking to himself in the grocery store, mumbling about the one older than the trees, and feeding the roots before they starve. Garcia decided to keep his distance, for now. He began parking on the corner near Josephine in the early hours, coffee steaming in a paper cup, watching through the windshield. The neighborhood was quiet, wrapped in frost and fog. No movement in the trailer windows. No sound except the ticking of his engine and the far-off wail of the train somewhere on the west side of town. But every so often, as the fog shifted under the branches, Garcia thought he saw something move near the garage. Not Marion exactly, just the faint outline of a man's head turning, watching. The freight train's horn had been echoing across Los Molinos all afternoon, a low, lonely sound that rolled in with the wind and rattled through the bare walnut branches. Garcia heard it from his stakeout on Josephine Street, sipping the last of his coffee as the sun bled into a flat, gray dusk. 3 streets west, a man named Royce Daniels had stepped off that same train. Mid-30s, maybe older. Layered clothes in mismatched colors, backpack slung over one shoulder, the uneven shuffle of a man who'd been walking too long on worn-out boots. He'd followed the road from the tracks into town, watching his breath bloom white in front of him. Los Molinos wasn't much to look at. A handful of stores, 3 gas stations, and miles of orchards standing like dead armies in the distance. The cold here was sharper than he expected. It cut through the seams in his coat, needling its way down to the bone. By nightfall, Royce had found a sheltered spot in the lot behind the old laundromat, a shallow overhang that kept most of the frost off. He settled there, knees drawn up, lighting a cigarette with trembling fingers. The street was quiet, except for the occasional creak of ice settling on the power lines. Somewhere far off, a dog barked once and fell silent. That was when he heard it. A slow, deliberate crunch of footsteps on frozen gravel. Not passing by. Approaching. Royce shifted, peering toward the south end of the lot. The fog there moved strangely, curling low to the ground, sliding between the shadows. A figure emerged, tall, wrapped in a filthy green parka, hair wild and tangled like windblown twigs, beard matted and streaked with gray. The man's glasses caught the dim light from a flickering street lamp, and for a moment, Royce thought they looked reflective, like the eyes of a cat at night. "You're trespassing," the man said. His voice was low, hoarse, like it hadn't been used in days. "Not your town." Royce opened his mouth to answer, but the man stepped closer. The smell hit first, damp earth, burnt metal, something sour and animal. "I've got a place you can stay," the man murmured, leaning in. "Warmer than this. Safer." Before Royce could move, something hard and cold slammed into the side of his head. The world tilted, light fractured, his knees buckled, and the frozen gravel rushed up to meet him. When he came to, his wrists and ankles were bound with coarse rope. He was lying on the floor of a dim, cluttered garage. The air smelled of oil and mildew. Tools hung in uneven rows along the walls, some rusted, others gleaming as if they'd been cleaned recently. In the center of the concrete floor was a square of wood, its edges darkened with age, a trapdoor. From somewhere beyond it came a slow, steady sound, not quite wind, not quite breathing, and under it all, a faint whisper in a language Royce didn't know, curling up from the darkness below. The man with the wild hair crouched beside him. In the cold light, Royce could see the maple leaf silhouettes spray-painted across the garage walls, overlapping in black, brown, and green. "My name's Marion," the man said softly, almost kindly. Then he smiled, a crooked, gap-toothed grin that never reached his eyes. "You're going to help me feed the roots." Royce tried to keep his breathing steady. the rope biting into his wrists every time he flexed his hands. The garage was dim, the single bulb overhead buzzing weakly, shadows spilling from every corner. Marion crouched beside him again, and that's when Royce saw the glasses, thick square lenses that made his eyes look swollen and too large for his face. The glare off them caught the light like two dull coins. Behind the glass, his eyes darted fast, never settling for more than a second, as if tracking things no one else could see. "You ever meet the commissioner of Leaf Shadows?" Marion asked, voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "No, of course not. They don't let just anybody in the boardroom. Gotta have clearance. Gotta have the pattern." Royce swallowed hard. "Listen, man, Marion clapped a grimy hand over his mouth. "The overseer of soil breaths says shh." His voice turned sing-song. "Can't have the roots listening too soon. They get impatient. They get hungry." He stood suddenly, grabbing a rust-flecked crowbar from the wall and jamming it under the edge of the square in the floor. The trapdoor groaned open, spilling a wave of air up into the garage. Air that was warm and damp, carrying a smell that didn't belong anywhere above ground. Wet stone, feathers, rust, something metallic and sharp, like the inside of a slaughterhouse drain. Royce felt his stomach clench. There was a sound down there too, faint at first but growing. Not footsteps, not breathing. A slow, deliberate scrape, like something enormous shifting its weight against stone. Marion adjusted his glasses, peering down into the black. "Director of the old roots, the one older than the trees, the one who lives below. Azazel." He said the last name like it was a prayer and a curse rolled together. "He's the real zoning board, approves or denies every living thing. You, my friend, are on the agenda tonight." The whispering came again, curling up from the trapdoor. Not English, not anything Royce recognized, but layered, like several voices speaking over each other, some slow and deep, others high and skittering. Marion leaned in close, his glasses catching the bulb's reflection, his magnified eyes so large Royce could see his own terrified face mirrored in them. "Ever seen the meeting minutes of the council below? They're written in bone. You're gonna love your part." With that, Marion gripped the rope at Royce's ankles and began dragging him toward the opening. The bulb above swayed, sending shadows lurching across the walls, the painted maple leaves bending and stretching as if they were alive. The warmth rising from the darkness wrapped around Royce's legs like a living thing. The whispers grew louder, and somewhere deep below, something moved. Slow, patient, and impossibly heavy. Marion stood at the trapdoor's edge, his head cocked to one side, thick glasses catching the swing of the bulb overhead. Royce couldn't see his eyes now. Only the warped glint of the glass, like staring into a warped mirror. Yes, I know," Marion said suddenly, looking toward the far corner of the garage as if someone was standing there. "But he's early. What am I supposed to do? Keep him on ice like the treasurer of cold winds? No, the schedule's already printed. We can't just..." He broke off, nodding rapidly, muttering under his breath. I told them about the soil quota. The overseer of depths doesn't care about timelines. He just wants the offering fresh." Royce tried to twist away, the rope scraping his wrists raw, but Marion's attention snapped back to him like a trap closing. "Don't squirm," he said, leaning in so close Royce could see his own terrified reflection in the magnified lenses. "They hate when the meal wriggles." From the open trapdoor below, the air pulsed, not with wind, but with the exhale of something alive. The heat that rolled out smelled worse now. Damp feathers, wet stone, and a copper tang that made Royce's tongue ache. Somewhere in the dark, the scraping grew louder. Marion straightened, looking toward the opposite wall again. "No, I won't taste this one. Last time I got in trouble with the auditor of flesh." His laugh was low, wheezing. "I'm a provider, not a sampler." He stepped behind Royce, gripped the rope around his ankles, and dragged him until his body hung halfway over the trapdoor. Royce's stomach dropped at the sight below. a yawning black hollow that seemed deeper than the earth should allow. The whispers from below swelled, a dozen voices layered and urgent, speaking a language older than anything Royce had ever heard. Marion adjusted his glasses, the thick lenses warping the bulb's glow into strange, shimmering shapes. "Minutes will reflect," he said solemnly, "that the roots were fed on this day, in full compliance with the bylaws of the council below." Then, without warning, he let go. Royce fell. The warm, reeking air rushed past him, the whispering voices rising to a howl. He hit dirt hard enough to knock the breath from his lungs. Pain shot through his side, his bound wrists scraping against something rough. Not stone, not wood, but something that felt fibrous. Above, the rectangle of light shrank as Marion leaned over the opening, tilting his head like he was listening to someone whisper in his ear. He gave a small nod, then stepped away. The bulb's sway slowed, and with it, the last bit of light vanished as the trapdoor slammed shut. Royce was alone. Except, he wasn't. For a moment, there was only the ringing in Royce's ears, and the thick, wet smell of the earth pressing in from all sides. The darkness wasn't the kind you adjusted to. It was the kind that seemed to push back against sight, swallowing even the idea of light. Royce's breath came in short bursts, steam rising from his lips and vanishing almost instantly in the damp heat. Then he heard it. A sound low and deep, like a tree trunk groaning in a storm, but stretched and layered until it became almost a voice. Words formed and dissolved, not in English, not in anything human, but in a rhythm that made his skin crawl. Something brushed his leg. He froze, pulse hammering, feeling along the dirt floor. The rope around his wrists caught on something rough and fibrous, thick strands woven into the soil itself. He gave it a small tug and felt it shift back. Roots. Only. They pulsed. The ground beneath him felt warm in patches, almost feverish. A slow thud, like a heartbeat, traveled through the soil and into his bones. He tried to scoot backward, but his bound feet met resistance. Not a wall, something softer, something that gave a little under pressure. When he pressed again, it pulled away. The whispering stopped. From deeper in the dark came a new sound, the slow drag of something enormous pulling itself forward. Royce could hear soil shifting, crumbling, the muted crack of smaller roots tearing away. The heat in the ground swelled, wrapping around him in waves that made the air heavy and hard to breathe. Above him, there was movement. The trapdoor creaked open just an inch, spilling a weak shaft of yellow light into the black. Marion's magnified eyes appeared in the gap, searching the darkness below. "You're in good hands now," he called down, voice almost cheerful. "The one who lives below says you'll make an excellent quarterly report." He tilted his head like someone was speaking in his ear, then nodded. Yes, of course. I'll leave them to it." The trapdoor closed again. In the dark, the dragging grew louder. The warm patches in the dirt shifted, surrounding Royce on all sides. Then something pressed against his ankle, thin and probing, but strong enough to lift his leg off the ground. Another slid across his shoulder. The texture was rough like bark, but moved with the slow, deliberate pressure of muscle. The whispering voices returned, closer now, overlapping, weaving into a sound that seemed to sink into Royce's mind. His heart pounded against his ribs, the rope biting into his wrists as he fought against it. The last thing he heard before the heat closed over him completely was the heartbeat in the ground, slow, steady, and impossibly deep, keeping time for the roots that never stopped feeding. Garcia sat in his cruiser on the corner of Josephine Street, the engine idling low, the heater struggling against the cold that seemed to pour in from every seam. Frost had crept halfway up the windshield, curling in white veins that caught the light from the street lamp. He'd been watching Marion Mapes' trailer for 3 nights straight. The same warped siding, the same sagging garage, the same Chevy van hunched under the tangle of black oak and maple branches. But tonight felt different. The fog had thickened after midnight, curling low across the yard until it almost hid the van's stenciled leaves. Somewhere far off, a freight train groaned through the dark, its horn muffled by the cold. The sound barely faded before Garcia caught movement, a shadow slipping from the van to the garage. Marion. Garcia's hand hovered over the radio, but he didn't call it in. He wanted to see this through himself. If Mapes was tied to the disappearances, he'd catch him in the act and finally end it. He killed the headlights, stepped out into the cold, and crossed the street. The gravel in Marion's drive crunched under his boots. Loud, too loud, but there was no reaction from inside the garage. The air smelled faintly of oil, mildew, and something else. Burnt plastic and copper. Garcia eased the side door open. Hinges groaned softly. The garage was dim, lit by a single swaying bulb. Tools hung in crooked rows along the wall, their shadows stretching across the paint-smeared plywood. Every surface was marked with the same black, brown, and green maple leaves. In the center of the floor was a square wooden panel, old, scuffed, and stained dark at the edges. The trapdoor. Something warm rolled out from the gap between the wood and the floorboards, brushing against his face. It wasn't the kind of warmth you got from a furnace. It was humid, wrong, carrying the sour smell of feathers and the metallic bite of blood. From below came a sound. Not a voice exactly, but a deep, rhythmic scrape, as if something massive was shifting in the earth. Garcia drew his sidearm and flashlight, its beam slicing into the shadows, and crouched beside the trapdoor. The wood was slick with condensation. He placed a hand on it and felt it throb. Once, twice. Then he heard it. Marion's voice, faint but clear, as if speaking to someone right beside him. Yes, yes. The auditor of depths will be pleased. Oh, he's ripe. Smells like fear in winter. A pause, then a low chuckle. Of course, I'll send him down. Garcia's jaw tightened. He pried at the edge of the trapdoor. It came up with a slow, groaning creak. The bulb above flickered, and from the darkness below, the whispering began, rising to meet him, wrapping around his thoughts like vines. He hesitated only a moment before stepping through. The trapdoor slammed shut above him. Garcia hit the dirt hard, his boots sinking an inch into the damp soil. The air was thick and warm, humid enough to bead sweat instantly along his hairline despite the freezing world above. His flashlight beam cut through the dark in a narrow cone, showing only walls of packed earth. The floor beneath him was uneven, crisscrossed with thick, fibrous strands that seemed to twist away from the light. He turned in a slow circle. The trapdoor above was already shut tight, the faint glow of the garage bulb gone, leaving nothing but black soil overhead. Mapes! Garcia's voice was steady, but the sound died too quickly, swallowed by the damp air. Somewhere ahead, something moved. It wasn't footsteps. The sound was heavier, slower, like something dragging across the dirt with purpose. A faint vibration traveled through the ground into Garcia's boots, a deep, steady thump that felt almost like a heartbeat. He swept the flashlight toward the noise, catching glimpses. A root thicker than his arm sliding across the floor, pulsing faintly as though blood moved inside it. The beam glinted off moisture on its surface, and Garcia realized the moisture was seeping from pores in the bark-like skin. The smell was overwhelming now. Wet feathers, rust, and something sharp and electric, like the air before a lightning strike. It was the same scent that had clung to Eddie Harrell's body in the alley. "Where are you?" Garcia muttered, less to himself than to whatever was listening. The whispering began. It came from everywhere at once. Low, guttural voices in overlapping tones, some stretched slow like the creak of a tree in the wind, others fast and skittering, darting through his mind before he could pin down the words. The cadence made his skin crawl. It wasn't language meant for human ears. He moved forward, ducking under an arch of roots that hung from the ceiling like ribs. His light caught on something ahead, a shape slumped against the far wall. A man. Garcia approached slowly, the beam revealing torn, filthy clothes and a head lolled to the side. It was Royce. His eyes were open but unfocused, his skin pale, lips stained dark. Thin tendrils, roots, had grown over his shoulders and chest, burrowing under the skin in places. Garcia's grip on the flashlight tightened. He turned, scanning the shadows. Marion's voice drifted through the dark, not from any one direction, but from all of them at once. Treasurer of Bone returns the ledger. 2 entries tonight. Full compliance. The ground shifted. Something massive moved below the surface, circling. The heartbeat thud grew louder, shaking dirt loose from the ceiling. The roots swelled, curling up from the floor and down from the walls, their movements synchronized with that impossible pulse. Garcia stepped back, his boot catching on a root that tightened instantly, holding him in place. The flashlight flickered once, then died, plunging him into total darkness. The whispers surged, pressing into his ears, his skull, his thoughts. He could feel them inside him now, tasting his fear, weighing it. Garcia pointed his sidearm at the dark and pulled the trigger. The muzzle flash exposed something sinister walking towards him. He pulled the trigger repeatedly in that monster's direction, every muzzle flash exposing the creature, giant horns protruding from its head, white phosphorus eyes, moving at an unnatural pace. The creature was floating towards him, every round on target. The creature not slowing. Click, click, click. He was out of ammo. And then, something touched his chest. Not a hand, not a root. Something else, warm, smooth, and deliberate. Garcia had time for one sharp breath before the dark closed over him completely. The neighborhood was still. The kind of stillness only deep winter could bring, when even the dogs stayed silent and the wind seemed to have frozen mid-breath. On Josephine Street, frost had claimed every blade of grass and every splinter of the leaning picket fences. The black oaks and maples above Marion Mapes' trailer held their skeletal limbs perfectly still, draped in a thin white sheen that caught the dim light from the single street lamp. The garage door was shut now, no sign of movement, no sound of voices. Marion's Chevy van sat hunched in the drive like a sleeping animal, its camouflage of maple leaf silhouettes gleaming faintly under the frost. The van's tires were crusted with ice, as if it hadn't moved in weeks, though everyone in town knew that wasn't true. Out at the road, a Tehama County Sheriff's cruiser idled softly, exhaust curling into the cold air. The driver's door hung wide open, the cabin lights spilling pale yellow across the frost. The radio crackled once and went quiet again. On the inside of the windshield, a single maple leaf silhouette had appeared, faint at first, then darkening as if drawn from within the glass. Somewhere beyond the trailer, down in the earth where the frost couldn't reach, the whispers continued. Slow now, sated. Above, Marion stepped out onto the porch, pulling his filthy green parka tight around his shoulders. The thick lenses of his glasses caught the lamplight, making his eyes swell into strange, distorted orbs. He looked toward the cruiser, head tilted slightly, as though listening to something only he could hear. Yes, he murmured, his breath fogging the air. The council below approves. The roots are fed. With a sadistic smile, he turned and walked back inside, the door closing behind him with a hollow thud. The yard was quiet again. Thank you for stepping into the shadows with us. If you enjoyed this tale, subscribe to Sinister Phantom Tales and make sure to like and share this story with your bravest friends. New hauntings emerge every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, so stay close. The next tale may be darker than the last. Every story you hear is original, born from the blood-soaked soil of Tehama County, the cursed woods of Lassen National Forest, and the ancient secrets beneath Mount Shasta. These are not just stories. These are sinister phantom tales. Sleep tight.